to this first meeting of our planning committee of the new council year. I've taken the chair because I was chair before, so that seemed logical. The first item on our agenda tonight is to elect a chair.
I'd like to propose you.
Thank you very much. On the basis that all the other people present have either nominated or seconded me, I don't think there are going to be any other candidates, so I'll declare myself duly elected.
We
Sounds
know
like
we know a mug where we sleep.
that sounds like some country ending in Stan, really. There we go. Item number 2, well, thank you all for that. Item number 2 is to elect a deputy chair. Now, there are only 3 of us unfortunately present tonight because, as we'll hear in a minute, we have 2 apologies. And there are only 5 members of this committee anyway at this point, which does in fact represent half the council. The role of a deputy chair would only be really to chair these meetings in my absence, should that happen. And I'm wondering whether we postpone any decision about electing a deputy chair, A, until at least the other 2 members are present, so at least we've got 5 of us to consider it, and B, because at some point, potentially, if this council decides to go down a co-option route, we might end up with more councillors who might therefore end up on this committee. So,
we may get 2 more off the already elected.
and it may be that somebody will
That's a third possibility.
will come forward. Yes. So unless anybody feels passionately that we should elect a deputy chair, which probably means that actually they want to be the deputy chair, I will suggest that we postpone. All right. Well, we defer that one.
Do you want to just say defer to a future meeting?
To a future meeting, without saying specifically what meeting. We'll see how it goes. Now, the next item is to consider the terms of reference of this committee, which is always just about the first job that we do when committees meet for the first time in the council year. And the existing terms of reference have been circulated. And perhaps the first obvious thing to note is in 9.1. Membership to be elected at the annual meeting to comprise no less than 7 councillors, to include the mayor and or deputy mayor, and no more than 14 councillors in total. Which rather assumed that we'd have a full slate, because 7 would then be half the councillors, and that seemed to be a sensible number. But in fact, we wouldn't wish to exclude any councillor from participating in planning committee meetings at all. So if everybody wanted to join, that would be fine. Where it's slightly less fine is now, because we've actually only got 5. But on the other hand, 5 is exactly half of the number of current councillors. Which suggests to me that what we ought to be looking at is a revision to the wording to say it comprises no less than half of the current number of councillors at any one time, because that is 5 currently, it could be 40, it could be 7 out of 14 and so on, probably including the mayor and or deputy mayor still, and obviously up to the full amount of councillors. So does that seem like a sensible proposition to put to full council at the next meeting?
Totally.
Right. Apart from that, the only other thing I wondered was this, and it sort of struck me a bit this evening as I came here thinking, I'm already aware of 2 apologies out of 5, and if either one of you or both of you didn't arrive, I was going to be sitting here potentially in splendid isolation, having put in quite a lot of work on planning applications and being unable to do anything. And although it seems a bit presumptuous, I wonder whether, as part of our terms of reference, because we operate to timescales and we either have to put in a comment or we don't put in a comment, seems to me better that we put in a comment than not. Therefore, I wonder whether this committee should authorise the chair, in the event that any meeting is not quorate, to actually put in any response that he or she thinks is appropriate to any particular application. Doesn't force whoever is doing it to do it, but it would enable them to do it. It may be that if it was a particularly difficult stroke controversial application, that whoever is in that position might say, no, it's not appropriate for me to do that. But then I'd rather suggest the problem probably wouldn't arise, because where we get complex applications, first of all, we tend to open it up and invite all councillors to attend. And B, you'd probably expect us to be quorate anyway. It's meetings like this one, where there are a number of applications, but nothing staggering, where sometimes we've struggled.
The problem with this, there was a time, you won't know this, but all the councillors were actually on planning. Everybody. Then we got to 14 councillors, and we got some people saying, oh God, planning's so boring, why can't we just have what we have with the other subcommittees, which is an elected number?
Yes.
The problem we had, but even when we had 14 councillors and more councillors therefore on the planning subcommittee, you got people being a bit complacent and thinking, well, I don't need to bother to turn out because there'll be enough people. So the reality became, did it not, that we always struggled to be quorate.
There have certainly been a few meetings in more recent times when there has been just 3 people, which is just enough. We haven't, I don't think, yet hit a situation where we haven't been. But to say that it's been touch and go would be to put
Well,
it
you see,
mildly.
I had a good reason not to come tonight, but I came
And thank
because
you
I
for
suddenly
that.
had somebody come to visit me out of the blue.
Yes.
Because I knew that we probably would not be quorate if I didn't come.
Thank your guest for permitting you to come and join us tonight.
I fed her 2 hours early and took her back to where she came from.
Oh, she's not there. Well, anyway,
No,
thank her from
because,
me for the fact that that was possible.
But do you see what I mean? It's
Yeah.
become, but so it's become dependent on 1 or 2 people, I have to be honest, always turning up, which it shouldn't be. People should come. So that's another thing we need to tackle, in my view.
I would say your point about being able to sort of steam ahead, even if we're not quorate, I would say it's probably a good one for another reason, in that you can have unexpected reasons that will strike you on the very morning of the meeting as to why you can't suddenly come. You know, I very nearly had a similar thing today, and you know, can cause quite a lot of grief and guilt on your own part. I was very fortunate things went the other way around, but to know that the whole meeting wouldn't be derailed because of some misfortune, and that the things that are time limited, as you say, that need to be done can still be done, then so be it. I mean, the whole thing would have evaporated as a problem if this also could have been done by Zoom, which I know, or some other way, which I know is an iron in the fire.
Yeah.
But so you know, maybe the one day that would be a thing of the past where we have to go quorate because people aren't in, they can just log in from wherever they are. But in the meantime, I think you know, my very limited experience with these things, what you're saying sounds good. So you know, I would support.
I think, and I think as well, because you're sending out a report beforehand. If anybody has got any particular views, they can, and they know they can't come. They can feed that back.
Well, particularly if they were aware of that provision,
Yeah.
because it would make them perhaps.
It just makes us more agile, doesn't it? Makes us
It
more
does.
agile.
I mean, I hope that maybe legislators will in due course at least perhaps permit committees of councils to meet by Zoom.
Yeah.
Even if we can't do a full council meeting, that would help in situations such as the one you had this evening and so on. Potentially. So
It's difficult, David, because people could get lazy and think, well, at least if David's there, we all know he's going to write something and take, you know.
Yeah.
well, I suppose there is a risk,
Yes,
and
there is a
clearly,
huge risk.
if that started to happen, I think
We'd
we'd
have
have to
to
look,
We'd have to
we'd have to look
address
at
it.
it because
Yeah, that
it
could
shouldn't.
happen.
Yes,
It shouldn't be a situation in which one person ends up speaking for the entire council, particularly not on
That's the risk, isn't it?
matters of substance.
So, I think what I'm going on to say is that the wording needs to be very careful so that
I mean, the only
we
other
don't
thing
get
is
ourselves into a position where we can't
you
change it.
could, if there was anything where you did want to talk about it in a council meeting, then it could go on, if there was enough time, go on to the full council meeting.
Well, there's always that, and that should be the default position. If a consideration could be deferred to the next full council meeting, then it is deferred to the next full council meeting. It's just for those ones where it isn't possible to defer it, and which unfortunately is often the case. You know, by the time we've got to these, some of them we already sought an extension till tomorrow morning to enable us to have our meeting tonight and put in a response, which is why sometimes I'm drafting the specific wording of a response after a meeting and emailing it to Lisa at sort of midnight has been known. Well,
I would say let's not lose sight of the reasons as to why you want to do it, which is that we can respond in a timely fashion.
yeah.
To things. That would be a wise adaptation.
Well, I think what we'll do then is we will make a recommendation to full council, which Clark will permit that I can cobble together following tonight.
Well, I'll tell you what I've written as one of the as that point here. In the event that a meeting is not quorate, the chair will be given delegated powers to submit comments on behalf of the council. Is that okay?
Perhaps we could add, taking up a point that I've forgotten who raised it.
It was me.
If it is not possible for it to be considered at the next full council meeting, if we added those words,
yes, I think that's
that may provide some reassurance to everybody that we are trying to involve people. And then when we come to it in full council, I will make the point to those councillors who perhaps aren't aware of what we do here particularly, is that I have this policy of doing a written report on an application. It doesn't express an opinion, or at least I try to make sure it's not expressing an opinion, it's purely factual. Which therefore gives members of the committee an opportunity, if they know they're not going to be present, and there is a fear we might end up unquorate, and therefore I might be in the position of putting in a response to have the benefit of their responses. It doesn't count as a sort of proxy vote from outside if we have a valid meeting. So, for the sake of argument, if we have a decision tonight and we actually put it to a vote and it's 2-1 for or against, but I happen to know that both Councillor Davis and Councillor Fuller would have tipped the balance the other way, that wouldn't tip the balance the other way because they would have to be present to vote.
I was going to say yes.
But if we got to a situation where there was just 2 of us here, for the sake of argument, then I could consider what they had to say.
But then you wouldn't have a meeting if there was only 2.
You wouldn't have a meeting if there was only 2. So it wouldn't happen.
Well, it might do. I mean, in the sense that you and I came tonight, and we were a bit dependent upon you making it back from wherever Cheltenham's and Peter, I think you said it was. Which explains the slightly informal attire, by the way. I didn't have time to go in and change even. So I said, I'm grateful because I'd much rather have you here however you're dressed, but probably for a reason. And I did the opposite. I haven't had a chance to change because I'm wearing the suit I was wearing in the office earlier. Right, well we're actually still on terms of reference, which isn't great. Is there anything else about the terms of reference that we would wish to alter? I mean, there is a reference to county structure plans and district plans, so it might be that we might have to
change that to unitary.
To just change it to consider relevant plans, for example, because we don't have a county anymore. Well, we do, but we don't have a county council and we don't have a district council, so that might seem to be logical.
So you just want to change that to relevant plans?
Consider relevant plans, with a capital P as it were. But other than that, I wouldn't have thought we would need to look at anything else. Let's leave it to the bright ideas for anything else we could take to full council, because I think it's our recommendation to full council that we change our terms of reference in a particular way. I'd be a bit surprised if we came along and said we want to change them and they said no. Subject perhaps to the point about giving the
They might,
delegated
yeah.
authority, maybe they're all horrified at the thought.
But then if they are, then they have to join the planning commission.
Well, exactly. I'll say you can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
Right, well, if we're finished with the terms of reference, we move on to receive and accept apologies for absence. And I'm aware of both Councillor Fuller and Councillor Davies having indicated they're unable to attend tonight. Do we accept their apologies?
I do know that Councillor Davies is away.
So is Councillor Fuller.
Representations of interested parties there on too. Declarations of interest. Perhaps bearing in mind we have a new councillor here this evening, maybe we better do it particularly formally. So I'll read the wording out. To receive any declarations of interest from members under Section 50 of the Local Government Act 2000, that's our standing order number 13. That requirement applies only in respect of matters to be considered by the council at this meeting. And then there are two possible interests: a disclosure and pecuniary interest. In other words, one where there is, on the face of it, a potential financial interest. So if your next door neighbour is putting in a planning application, for example, and it might impact upon your home, you would probably have to declare that and withdraw. Or another interest, which might be that you happen to know the applicant. But
well, I've got one for the coffee tavern, because I know the people who own the coffee tavern.
right,
Yes,
but that would be another interest.
I'd like to speak to it.
You may speak to it, and you may, because it's another interest,
Yes.
so you're not disqualified. It's so that the public at large can have a degree of confidence that there aren't shady deals going on behind the scenes to ensure that we don't make waves or whatever else it is. So, subject to that particular one, are there any other interests for anybody to declare? So, I can't remember, I'll just write coffee tavern. That moves us on to the minutes of the previous meeting. These were circulated. Present from myself and Councillor Chesser, Councillor Humphreys, who is no longer on this committee, and Councillor Clark, who is now become mayor. So there are only two of us who are actually present. So in the circumstances, shall I propose those minutes?
I'll second.
And we'll second them. Seems terribly incestuous. There are about 7 pages of this, so bear with me whilst
I think you had rather a lot of.
well, we have got complex applications, so instead of little one-liners that say no objection, it was about a page and a half on certain things. It's the 1st of June, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, he does it, Councillor Jones. My feeling has always been that it's a very good way of learning about the town, is
Yes.
to be on planning.
Yes.
And we learn a lot about the town.
Yeah. I'm beginning to find that out, I think.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that takes us into our various planning applications. So, put that to one side. So the first application is in respect to 10 Stoke Hill, converted house opposite Jesus Church. The applicant is subject to a planning application not that long ago to permit the change of use, which, when we fully understood it, we decided that we wouldn't want to object to. They got their planning permission. They've now applied to put up what is described as a surface-mounted and framed identity sign. Surface-mounted simply means it's on the wall, as opposed to something that's hanging and projecting from it.
It's a listed building.
Do you know what? I had a feeling it was,
Yeah,
but the application doesn't specifically refer to it being listed.
The thing
No,
we-
but it is
application
Lloyd
for reversion
Mills
control.
who's the officer, so that makes.
So I think it probably is, and I think that's something we will
I think it
factor
should
into
be,
our
because you're not
considerations.
supposed to dig holes in the stone or the water, if it's a listed building.
No. It's obviously quite tricky if you're operating a particularly new, or in this case,
Well, yeah,
relocated
you could find some
commercial
old
business.
holes, you could find old holes.
They might be able to find some old holes, or they might be forced to consider just putting something up in windows or something, if we decided against it totally. The signage itself, I put some sort of dimensions there which I took off the application, and if you've actually looked at the thing on the portal, you can see that the way it's done, it's quite relatively tasteful, and osteopaths with the two O's kind of ring, a little kind of diagrammatic sketch of a back, you can almost envisage it, and then a website and a telephone number underneath, so it's relatively discreet. Now, I did indicate that I referred people to our planning committee guidance document and also to our guidance on advertising, and they're attached to all of this stuff, which partially I have to say don't Councillor Jones for your benefit, because Councillor Chester and I have been doing this since time immemorial, but we do have all of these policies that were sort of have been crafted over the ages, so I attached them all. There were no comments on the planning portal as recently as the weekend, but it's interesting because Councillor Chester's point was exactly the one that went through my mind, because I thought, I'm pretty sure that's a listed building.
Yeah.
I'm just
And
reading
there's
the
no reference to
just
it.
reading the application that's on the website. The notice of application is for development affecting a listed building or a building within the conservation area.
Right.
So I think because it's a sign, you don't have full planning and listed building consent. I think if it's on a listed building, by the looks of things, it's all covered under the one. But it is that's why Lloyd Mills is doing it. It is a listed building.
Well, I suppose there are a couple of ways of looking at it. Often where matters involve applications for listing building consent, whatever our view, we will tend to add words to the effect of subject to a review of the conservation officer, because we may not be aware of something, particularly say internal works, where we might not think there's anything particularly bad about taking out a particular wall or doing something, and Lloyd Mills might sort of throw a complete fit at the thought of this wonderful 16th century wall disappearing or something. But of course a sign on the outside of the building is very obvious. We also have our own, I refer to it elsewhere because there's another advertising matter about the Coffee Tavern which we'll be looking at later. But we have our own policies about advertising, and there's a section where I put up all the stuff that
We also have our own signs on our own building just over the road on the courthouse with all of the tenants' names on them.
We do. I look to you, Councillor Chester, because it's flat and mounted on the wall.
It's not lit in any way.
It's not lit
It's not
in any
behind glass.
form. It doesn't appear to be behind glass. I think it's probably a bit like, say, a traditional solicitor's or doctor's
Yeah.
glass.
I think they've
plate,
already.
but I think
I
it's
think it's.
probably an
I think that's
aluminium.
acceptable.
Is that,
Yeah.
is that building?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
That's the one.
Well done.
We can embrace technology.
I think they've already got a sign,
Yeah, they've got
and they're
a sign.
having
They
a
have.
second sign.
In fact, I think.
So is it instead of the current
Yes.
sign?
No,
well,
I think they're just putting a
yes, I
second
believe,
sign up.
as
Yeah.
I hinted at here, because I don't absolutely know the answer.
I think I'm sure.
But there
it
is an existing sign which is described as being larger. And I think what's happened is that they put a sign up without realising that there was an issue.
Yeah.
And then it was raised with them, and then they went to Mark Benz, who, if you're not aware, Mark Benz is a local architect who frequently pops up in applications that we're considering and does know his stuff.
Yeah.
and he's put in an application and he makes the point that this is smaller than the existing sign. Now, whether in fact there is an optimal sign size, I have to say I don't personally know. There might be, and it may be that that's part of the clue, that he's putting it in a bit smaller than what they
Did you
put up
see the
originally.
sign?
So it's a bit like,
Oh, right, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the one that's already there.
That's
Yeah.
the one that's already.
and it's
So it's retrospective.
yes, I was going to say, it's a sort of
effectively.
retrospective application to
Yeah.
correct a situation. Now, of course, we could just turn around and say, we don't like the idea of there being any sign on there and take it off. You know, take the existing one off and we don't want to put a new one up. Perfectly entitled to say that if that was our view.
There are other commercial buildings in that area. There's the kitchen shop.
Yeah.
You know,
It's
it's not
certainly
like
not-
it's in the middle of a very, very residential area.
And it's about as discreet as these things could be.
Let's go for them.
So, if we're not that exercised by it, why don't we simply say that we have no objection subject to any contrary view of the Conservation Officer and leave it at that? Let's see, I screwed that on here fairly regularly. Right, the next one wouldn't concern the Conservation Officer. 96 Platform Road, a single-storey rear extension to incorporate a small breakfast room. Wasn't an awful lot to say about this. It provides a small breakfast room which will link the kitchen and dining facility to the garden, constructed from bees box, treated with a render, flat roof of grey slate and grey fiberglass with a roof light. I've given its width, its height, the ceiling, essentially large sliding glazed doors with frames of a dark finish. And because of where it is, it's certainly not visible from the highway. Doesn't impact on on-site parking, I suppose I could have also said. Doesn't impact on the access to the property in any way. I have to say I'm struggling to find any problem with it. So unless anybody has any difficulties.
No.
It's just one sort of crossing.
Yes, I think it's between. It's on the opposite side of the road, and there are two roads off into the estate on the left-hand side as you go out of Angle, as it were, and it lies between those two.
That one, I think. That's 96.
Yeah.
Well, look at the report.
Yeah.
We've got a few extensions done now, I think.
Yes, I mean quite often.
Sure.
What we're beginning to see an increasing number of is people knocking down conservatories that were put up some years ago and now replacing them with something that's more extension-like.
Yeah.
Shall we say? There is one of those
Well,
that
because
crops
the
up
doors are
later.
relaxed, haven't they? Quite a bit.
Yeah. So no objection to that one. 36 New Road, a new front porch and a single-storey rear extension. This is a good example actually. There already is a front porch, and it's not the only property that has been built forward of what at one time might have looked like a building line. The building line's long since gone west because there are other ones. This one has an extension or a front porch. This front porch appears to be somewhat bigger, but it will be built from brick as before. It's no higher than it was before. The conservatory is to be replaced. So I said that was a growing trend with a block-built rear extension extending across the whole width of the property. We'll have a flat roof, concrete tiles to match the existing with a raised roof light. And again, I put in sort of the heights, and because the roof light is actually sort of like that, so it actually the glazing goes up and goes down. So it's a sort of raised one. Hence the fact there's another 415 on top. And yes, across the back there's a single rear window, and then what it looks like a sort of 6-panel, and I don't know whether it's a sliding door or an opening door, but basically look, a lot of the back is just glass in a PVC frame. again, no comments on the planning portal, and again, frankly, very difficult to see any reason to get exercised by it. So no objection to that one. Now the coffee tavern is an interesting one. On the website, you do get some useful pictures because you see how it is, and you can see the colouring. At the moment, the woodwork to the front is a sort of dark red, and it has the words "The Coffee Tavern" written on it, once painted on it. Now, apart from anything else, it's a Grade 2 listed property. This relates to all the woodwork on the frontage. Although the application refers to the front exterior woodwork surrounding the windows and so on, above the whole of the frontage there's a sort of wooden, sort of like a fascia, like that. And that's also going to be painted. And the colouring alters from dark red to, as they put it here, a darker blue. And there is a sort of colour. It's a specific deluxe colour, I think, from memory. And they're going to replace the white painted coffee tavern lettering with a backlit wording of the coffee tavern in dark grey black metal letters. So as I put it here, the proposal relates to all the woodwork on the frontage, would involve the replacement of the existing right-hand sign with what is described as a matching poster display case. There's a design and access statement that refers to other premises in the marketplace using metal lettering, and they cite in particular the Barber's Cone Trends. That design and access statement contains the following: backlighting of the metal letters will subtly enhance the lettering, describing this as a more muted than the downlighting at other shops or the fully black backlit Blue Marlin Fish and Chip Shop. The Blue Marlin Fish and Chip Shop is a sort of source of considerable consternation here because we would never have wanted it the way it is. But
it's a benchmark that is
it's far too late to do anything about it, but of course now everybody cites it and says, well, they've done it, so why can't we?
It was done in the 60s, I think, wasn't it? When they could do what the heck
Yeah.
they like.
Pretty much, and my view has always been, just because somebody else has done it doesn't make it right.
And we stopped Tesco's. We have stopped other people.
We have. Now, I'll just finish reading this and we can have a bit of a debate. It also states that replacing the painted sign on the right-hand side with a posted display case will bring the look of the frontage more in keeping with the rest of the marketplace, mirroring the left-hand side and matching the display cases outside other shops, including Dexter's. They seem very keen on telling us where something similar is going on in the town. Draw your own conclusions. And then I said, look, I refer you to the OTC Planning Committee guidance documents and OTC guidance on advertising. I've also put in fact attached to it the guidance on illuminated signs as well, because we have it, although it actually replicates something in the main guidance document, I think. There were no comments on the planning portal when I looked, but that meant that the conservation officer had not yet put in an observation that I could tell you about unless it's changed since then.
It does say there's a comment, but it's a bit strange. When you click on
The comment appears to be from us.
I know,
and it's not a comment.
but it's saying that we don't need to be consulted.
Exactly. And now, if we sent that, I don't know why we would have sent it, because
No, we
we
haven't.
would want to be consulted, because I suspect we're going to have a review.
I think that's a comment from somebody else.
Yeah, it's very odd, but anyway, we'll make it clear when we put in our
Yeah.
What
comment.
is the comment?
Well, the comment was broadly along the lines of, we're not really sure why you've told us about this, because we
Yeah.
don't think we need to have been informed.
But above it says something about historic England and on that and the same date. So I'm wondering if
But it comes
they,
under parish.
Oh,
It comes under
it's
the heading
their
parish
comment,
council, doesn't it?
but they've put it under parish town council.
That might very well be the case.
Yeah.
It certainly looked, I mean, I looked and then I did a double take and thought,
Mm.
why have we said that? And then I came to the conclusion, I can't believe Lisa would have done it, so
No.
some sort of a mix-up. I know that you've declared another interest, but you've also indicated you wanted to speak
I
to
feel
it, so
very strongly about lighted signs, and
I
I've
know you
always
do.
resisted it throughout this town. Many an hour has been spent in planning meetings
Talking about
resisting it.
lighted signs,
And
particularly
saying
inside
we
the
have to put
conservation
up with
area.
the blue marlin, but we don't like it. But it isn't on all day because they're only open
Mm.
twice a day.
We do distinguish between backlit signs and other forms of illumination. But it also is fair to say that our comments don't specifically relate in our own documentation to listed buildings, where I think even greater concerns arise. And I have to say that my initial reaction when I saw that it involved any form of backlighting was,
Yeah, this is the sort of thing that they're thinking.
yeah.
Is that the barbers?
No, that's just,
Oh, and it illustrates.
it's an example. Mm.
But I would have to say that I don't object to changing the colour, I don't object to putting up the sign on the right hand side, I don't object to metal lettering, but I'm not happy with the lighting.
Added to that, they don't open at night.
So
There's
why do
no
they
need for them to be seen at night.
Actually, that's a very good point, because if they were an evening restaurant serving evening meals,
And they're not.
there might be a greater cause for them to have a backlit.
Yeah.
Thank you, because I hadn't, that
So-
thought
so
happened to
do
come
I.
to me.
Unless, do you think they're thinking of doing
Well,
it in the
that's it, that's
future?
Well, maybe they are.
I don't know their plans, but
Can it be, would it make a difference to us if they could open at night?
Well, I think the short answer is that wouldn't be a planning issue. So if they start to open up at
They'd
night,
have
they
to
start
go.
to open at night. And if as a result of opening at night, they want to do certain things where they do require permission, then we'd have to think about it.
yeah.
We can only treat this application as it is.
Yeah.
Two of us have expressed concern, but you're the new boy on this committee, and you may not feel quite the same way about lighting signs in the conservation area and such like.
Well, firstly, what does this conservation area contain? I was trying to look for it down.
There is a map,
Right.
which you should be able to get up
There is a
somewhere.
map.
Okay.
It certainly,
Might be on
I
the-
can't remember exactly what, in terms of trying to describe it, but it's
Mm.
clearly within the conservation area, which would extend some way down St Oaths, some way into,
all the way along West Street.
all the way along West Street to,
Way past.
to
Way past.
yeah, right up to beyond the Jesus Church.
Yeah.
Right.
It extends down North Street, it extends up New Street.
Right.
It's quite a large area of the centre. To all practical intents and purposes, it is the commercial centre of the town, excluding those commercial
Yes.
premises that exist off East Road and on the Wharf development.
Yes.
Well, I personally don't think it would be a good idea to backlight the sign, not least because it would set a precedent, which I know people want to say the Blue Marlin has, from what I've gathered, but quite rightly they don't. If that was a mistake, then okay, possibly. So no, to cut a long story short, I wouldn't wish to support it. The backlighting anyway.
Yeah. So what we would want to say is that we don't object to the other aspects of the application,
Yeah.
but we do object to the backlighting proposed for the lettering.
Yeah.
We've just got more lights being left
I
on.
mean, it's custom and practice, we've just never had it.
And I do think that actually, in putting that in, Councillor Chesser's point about we can't see why a business that doesn't open at night would think it appropriate or necessary to have illuminated signage of any description.
Yeah.
And it's, I think they might think at winter perhaps when it's dark early, but then the lights are on and it's
And the
extraordinary.
lights are on, they're
It's-
bang
it's
outside
quite,
of the street light.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean it's not exactly an ill-lit part of the
No,
town, is
it's
it?
quite a place to visit.
But if we allow it, number 4, piggy.
Yeah, the greedy piglet will be next,
Yeah,
and
but
then
the
beans
next-
are wanted, and then
Absolutely, and it'll just be.
yeah. So it potentially is the thin end of the wedge, and
Yeah.
that's really what I started to feel. As soon as they started quoting other businesses at me, I thought, I can see exactly where this is heading if we're not careful, because then the next application will come along and said, well, the coffee tavern got it.
Yes, exactly. I mean, they've got the tables out looking very
Yes.
nice.
Yes.
You know, so they've had some
They've
Yes,
had
it's
something,
not
yeah.
that they've been thwarted at every turn
No,
by any
it's
stretch
not.
of the imagination.
Quite agree.
Did anybody have any issues with I'm assuming that we don't have any issues with the other aspects of it. I'm sure cavalierly said we don't.
The colour.
The colouring, for example, which actually I think is probably slightly more
Colour's
subdued.
nice, yeah.
Yes, no,
It's perfectly acceptable, and I don't see a problem with this signage, the other signage that they're talking about, the display sort of thing. That brings us to the first of two applications that are back before us again, and it's that crane again. There is a crane at the plant hire business at 28 Meanbound Business Park, and they got into a certain amount of difficulty because there were planning conditions which they just ignored. And these conditions particularly limited their hours of operation. At our last meeting, we considered an application to vary the conditions and essentially allow them to operate, well, they wanted to operate 24/7, to be in a position to operate 24/7. We had not wanted that before, and when it came back before us last month, we said, no, we see no reason to alter the views that we already have. What happened subsequently was slightly odd. Somebody from the public had clearly suggested that there was a camera mounted on the crane, and they were worried about the camera on the crane as invading their privacy. And it was raised by the planning department with the applicant, and they were asked outright, have you got a camera on there? Have you ever had a camera on there? To which the applicant said no. I've no reason to doubt that. ENC have said, because the whole thing's now been highlighted, well, if we're going to grant you any sort of planning permission, there'll be a condition on it that you mustn't mount a camera on it, which I'm sure we would thoroughly approve of.
Yeah.
I mean, it hadn't occurred to us to say don't put a camera on it because we just don't think they would, but that isn't an issue. It's also clear from the exchanges that have gone on between the council and the applicant that the council were talking about imposing some restrictions on
You're
hours.
talking about ENC now, are you?
Well, of course, no, technically now in NC.
Okay, but not us. the
Not
council.
us, yes, Ian Bayshire and NC. So there have been these emails that were going backwards and forwards, and they're on the website, so we can actually look at the portal and see them. And NNC had said, well, look, we would want to restrict your hours, and they wanted it to be Monday to Friday at 7:30, and I've just noticed a typo in my thing, it should say 1800 hours, not 100 hours, because the 8 disappeared and I hadn't noticed it before. And then the council was saying Saturday 7:30 to 1200, and for some reason or another, this was done in a hurry, the ones disappeared, so we've got 100 and 200. We'll just ignore those, they should in fact read respectively 1800 and 1200. In other words, they wanted it only to 12 noon on the Saturday. The applicant came back and said, well, we don't normally operate on the Saturday, but we want to be in a position to operate on the Saturday, and could we operate up till 5 p.m? So I guess the question is whether we want to in any way expand upon what we said before. And what we said last time in May was, we'll refer you to what we said in March. So you can see why we're beginning to get some effect for this one. just keeps coming back. But in terms of hours, I have to say the way I was reading what was going back from the planners was, well, we are minded to give you permission, because this thing was also supposed to be taken down.
Yes.
Hence the word demountable, which envisaged that it was a temporary thing that would go up and down. Well, it isn't temporary, it's been up and it stayed up. And we didn't really approve of that either. But it looks to me, from the way I read what's been going on, is that the ENC are going to say, yes, you can have it, but you're going to have to obey these hours, and you're not to put a camera on it. And I guess the question is whether we say anything further at all at this stage, and if so, what? I'd be minded to say that we support we support the planning authority in terms of imposing a condition about a camera. And the only reason we haven't said it before is it hadn't occurred to us that anybody might ever think about putting a camera on it, but just for the avoidance of doubt, we don't want cameras on it. Whether we want to say anything more about its operating hours, or whether we want to just leave our comments as they were before, in a sense, I looked to Councillor Cheshire because you twice expressed views on this.
Well, I don't. To me, I feel as a councillor bullied by these people. They don't care a lot about what we want for the town. They're right next to a large private housing complex. You look across and you see this stonking great crane, which is a commercial thing. And, so any promise they've ever made has never been kept. Am I not right?
Yes. Well,
Every
just
single time.
yeah. I mean, to remind councillors, we said Amber Town Council objects to the variation sought when an application for permission for the crane was first made. The council made no objection but sought a condition that the crane be taken down at weekends and bank holidays, and that operating hours should be restricted in line with other similar restrictions within the business park. Council remains of the view that such conditions are appropriate.
Yeah.
As a general rule, we don't tend to then go against our own earlier rulings.
No, we don't.
We will reconsider if circumstances have changed and we've become aware of extra information, as we're going to discover in a minute about another application. But I don't see that anything has changed about this. The only thing that's changed is the fact that somebody got exercised about the idea of a camera on it. And therefore I'd be inclined to say our comments are exactly as they were before, but we would support the imposition of a condition about the camera.
And if the district council, as was, feel it,
Yeah.
then say
I mean, we would be very happy if they did force them to take it down, which is what they should have been
love them
doing
to do it.
throughout. That's what their condition currently says they should be doing, but they haven't. They've just, council says, they've just done their own thing and thought they'd get away with it. And we do also have a policy on retrospective applications, which is that we would generally draw attention to the fact that
Well, I think we could put
Heartily
words in.
disapprove.
Can we draw attention to the fact
that
they've consistently tried to erode
the original conditions
and
were
they've
not abided by them.
very new people, you see.
Yep. All right. So let us say that where are we? Yeah, I mean, in effect, we're saying we still consider that the crane should be taken down at weekends and bank holidays, and that operating hours should be restricted in line with other similar restrictions within the business park. That we would think that it would be a good idea to have a condition on that no cameras should be mounted on the crane, third party
Should not be.
should not be mounted on the crane so as to raise any privacy issues, and draw attention to the fact that, notwithstanding the conditions that were imposed previously, the operator has simply continued to operate with disregard for those conditions.
Total disregard.
And we would
For
invite
any other
we would
thing
invite
we've
the
ever
council
made.
to take enforcement action.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, let's put the route in this time a bit.
Yeah.
But I do think
You have to keep
enough is
fidelity
enough,
with
really.
the last councils there as well, the previous councils, because they know.
Sorry.
You have to remain, keep fidelity, don't you, with
You
previous
do,
councils'
absolutely.
claims.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
what's the
I mean,
point?
we're obviously
Having a
entitled
meeting.
to take fresh views, and
Yeah.
a little bit later in the agenda I'm going to
Yeah.
raise something
But as I say,
slightly
having
along
fresh
those lines.
lines.
What did I put? Continue to object, camera, enforcement. Where am I? Right, we're getting towards the end. Bottom of the point. And as if something of a theme, the next matter also came before us at our last meeting for Stoke Doyle Road. Now, I confess, last meeting I did exactly what I did for this meeting. I prepared a paper like that and submitted it to everybody in advance of the meeting. And the observations I made was that looking at the plans that were on the website, the so-called extension didn't look like an extension, it looked like a separate building, not attached to the original building, with its own entrance, and we weren't at all happy really. So we'd said, and you'll see the comments that are on the agenda, it appears from the planning drawings provided that what is proposed might not be an extension but a separate structure with its own entrance. The council does not feel able to comment without a clearer understanding of the application. Mr. Beish from the planning department came back to us and said, in terms, I haven't actually brought it with me, but if we need it, Anna will find it for us. But essentially he said, the drawings are misleading. It's not the first time we've heard that this year. And it isn't, in fact, a separate structure. And from what he said, it seemed relatively clear to me that had we understood the application, we probably wouldn't have objected to it. As I indicated earlier, whilst our normal position is that we won't reconsider an application even if requested to, we will reconsider it if it becomes clear to us that we may have made a decision in error based on inadequate or incorrect information and what have you. And after all, we did say last time that we couldn't actually comment because we didn't think we knew enough. Mr. Beish has sought to reassure us that our concerns weren't well founded. I'm sure Anna might be able to find the relevant emails if need be.
I haven't got, it'll be Lisa who had those.
It came to
emails.
Lisa, yeah. I very nearly printed them up and brought them with me, but I'd forgotten them. I assumed Lisa was here and she'd be able to find it for
Have a look.
Who did the drawings? I can't remember.
Just had a look. It does look like there's a little gap between
It
it,
does,
but there
doesn't it?
obviously isn't.
We had the same problem recently, and very embarrassingly, with an application for a property in Clifton Drive, which actually was the property of now councillor Paul Davis, who at the time wasn't a
I was
councillor.
wondering if the same.
It's a good point actually. I don't know whether it's the same person who did it. I honestly can't remember. I think to check that. I think I might have registered it if it was Mark Benz, for example, who I mentioned earlier. But I can't say. I can't honestly remember who did it. But it does appear as if we were somewhat misled by what's on the actual plan itself, which really doesn't help.
But if you've got inaccurate plans, other things could be wrong.
Yes, I suppose so. I mean, I can only say that Mr. Beish seemed to be suggesting that we probably wouldn't be exercised by it. We could simply repeat the fact that we would want to see some proper and clear drawings
I've
before
got
we
them.
express
We
it.
got it.
Yeah. I've also got the email as well.
Ah,
That was the email that was from Ian Bay.
right, I was trying to do this from memory, so I got it wrong. Yeah, so this came to me, so from Ian Beige, Development Manager, Management Officer at NNC. I'm writing with regard to Slopewell Road. The property's main entrance and hallway is currently at the front of the property. However, the driveway runs to the left of the property and opens out to the rear of the existing bungalow. The property is set back within its plot, with the main usable garden area being to the front of the property facing Slopewell Road. The proposal would mean that the conservatory and kitchen diner would face in this direction and have direct access to the garden. The condition would ensure that the development was carried out in accordance with the approved plans, and having looked at the plans, if an application were to come forward to split the property in the future, I cannot see that it would be possible to create two separate dwellings capable of meeting the space standards requirements. I think he thought that our concern was that because this structure appeared to be separate, that in the end it would end up as a second dwelling,
Yeah.
which actually wasn't specifically the problem which we had with it.
But it must have occurred to him as well.
But it obviously occurred to him, and actually I think that although that one came, I think it might have been Lisa's email to me that then made the point that it's actually the problem is with the drawing itself. Now we don't, the problem in a sense is that because it's been brought to our attention by NNC, I don't think we can just do nothing. So I think we've got to say something, whatever the something might be. Now, if people have got an issue with the thing, we can say so. If we still don't think we've got enough information, we can say so. If people are now satisfied that they wouldn't object, we should say so. And we need, that is the plan, is it?
Yeah, there's the existing and proposed there.
Yeah, it was. Yes, you see, these plans are complete. Well, I wouldn't say they're different, but what these sets of plans, which is the existing and the proposed, don't do is show it on here, quite like what we saw here.
There, you
This
see,
bit.
yeah. You can see it.
And you can see at the top, and
A tiny bit, look.
it's a question of whether. Yeah, I still find this quite confusing as to whether there is a gap between that and there, or whether there isn't.
But I'm assuming that it's just
But
the
it's there.
drawing.
If you look on that one where I've just shown you, the sliver of light all the way down.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
it certainly goes
apart from the very
way
bottom.
down, apart from the shading, but I don't understand the significance of that shading, particularly looking at it.
Well, I think that's to show that the building next to it is further forward as well, deeper. You with me? Have you
Well,
seen it?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's just down there.
Yeah. Which is what Ian Beige has said in his email. hasn't he?
Proposed west elevation. And we can see a tiny little gap.
Right.
pass it back. It's kind of that area there was exercising me when I saw it, because it looked as if this structure is detached from the rest of it.
Detached.
But it's not, Bob, from what Ian Beige has said.
And yet the drawing makes it appear so.
Yeah.
Perhaps what we should say is that provided that the proposed extension is integrated into the main building and not in any way detached from it, we wouldn't object. But if it was to be detached, as the drawing appears to show, then we do object.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the way around it.
It seems to be attached by just a very low wall.
Just a tiny bit of
above the
water.
height of the knee.
Maybe that's it. Well,
That's what it is.
of itself, to me, that's not an extension, it's a separate building.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the drawing shows it's a low wall that connects it, smaller than your knee. That's my thing.
So, well, in that case, I don't know if you caught my suggestion there.
Yeah, what I've put, provided the proposed extension is not detached and joined to the existing property, OTC does not have an objection.
Yeah, I mean, it's important that we refer to the drawing
Yes.
indicating something different.
What are we upset about if it is detached?
Well, I think apart from anything else, it is misleading to describe it as an extension if it is an entirely separate building.
Yes.
And putting up separate buildings within the curtilage of an existing property raises all sorts of issues. I mean, it's not that uncommon these days, for example, to get rooms built over garage blocks.
I think, I mean, from the
more upmarket properties, perhaps.
from the description, demolition of existing UPVC conservatory and construction of new single-storey rear extension. With
No, that's the next one.
makes you. Oh, is that the next one?
That's
I'm
3
reading the
new
wrong
road
one.
close, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is
So
what it sounds
single
like.
story front and rear extension, internal.
An excellent alteration. It gives you no clue to the fact that it appears to be detached, according to the drawing.
Yes.
They would have to say it's detached if it's detached. You can't say
I
some.
don't see how you could describe it as an extension
No.
if it's not extending an existing property.
I think it's just how the drawing's been
I
done.
think it's probably a poor drawing or a misleading drawing, but I
don't.
think if we make the point that we wouldn't object, provided that it is part
Actually,
extending the existing property, but if
Yes.
it's in any way detached from and not fully integrated into, then we do object.
Yeah.
And then let them sort it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the frustrations of this is that sometimes we can only make decisions based on what's in front of us, and if the drawings are poor, it makes our job that much more difficult. And sometimes, looking at them on a screen as well, sometimes that's a bit easier. But looking at them on the screen, it's not always easy to tell. Right, the next one is 3 Newport Close, and this is a demolition of an existing UPVC conservatory and the construction of a new single-storey rear extension with a new roof light. As I've said, the existing conservatory extends a certain distance from the property at its deepest point, but it's not, if you like, a square, so it's more sort of L-shaped in terms of the current conservatory construction. The replacement extension, it doesn't extend quite as far, but it's right the way across the back of the property. It will be constructed of yellow facing brickwork with red brick corbelling to match the existing. Roof will have a low pitch interlocking concrete tiles, also to match existing. Windows and doors UPVC to match existing. Pitched roof is slightly higher than the existing conservatory roof, so it reaches the level of the first floor windows, but obviously doesn't project above them. The width of the extension is slightly wider than the existing conservatory, and it takes it slightly further beyond the rest of the existing house. No comments on the planning portal. Let's see. There's issues with it, I have to say.
Looks like they had an application for certificate of lawfulness refused.
Yes, which didn't come before us. But yes, you're right, you picked it up from what follows. We've had this before. We had it with the property in New Road very recently, where somebody wanted to build an extension, and part of the footprint of the extension was an existing extension, but it appeared that the existing extension had been constructed without planning permission. So they sought a certificate of lawful use to justify the original extension, thinking it would make it easier to get the permission for the new extension. And it went wrong in New Road. Interestingly enough, it's gone wrong here as well. And it's because these certificate of lawfulnesses are actually quite tricky. They're not just dished out.
They're cheap but expensive, aren't
They're quite expensive to do because you have to produce all sorts of evidence and statutory declarations. I've occasionally done them for clients, and they're just a nightmare. So having had that turned down, it doesn't stop them putting in a planning permission. But if you like, you look at it almost, arguably, as if there wasn't an extension or a conservatory on the back in the first place. But having said that, if they weren't demolishing something and were just constructing what they're constructing, I doubt very much looking at it that we'd have any problems with it.
Because the tricky bit could be if we wouldn't have approved of the old one anyway, because it was totally awful, unacceptable in some way.
Yes, I mean, having said that, looking at the drawings, it was a fairly bog standard conservatory, if I remember right, with a sort of brick course and then the glazing above it and so on. You know, the sort of thing. And when you can see the sort of roof of it there. It's that sort of thing. And of course, as an aside, we have frequently talked around these tables about planning applications which change modest properties into larger properties when the original planning permission for the overall development specified X number of two-bedroom properties, X, and so on, and therefore distorts the original planning application. And time after time after time, we would object as a matter of course, saying that it shouldn't happen because, and every time it was just rejected. And this isn't quite the same because it's not adding an extra bedroom or anything else, but it's a sort of symptom of the same thing. Relatively small properties are extended as far as they realistically can be, because actually it's probably cheaper to extend your property than it is to go and buy a new one. So that's what you get, and that's why we get so many applications for extensions. But having said all of that, I personally didn't see an issue with this one. So no objection. The last one, it's always nice to finish with something easy, is an oak tree. And I didn't bother to repeat what's in the wording of the on the agenda about the works that they were doing, because it just bored me to tears, so I just said it's various tree works to an oak. It's a large oak, it's subject to a TPO. The tree works are proposed by New Valley Trees, so it's obviously been looked at by some proper people. And it looks to me as if the works are what we would normally describe as tree husbandry, and under our normal policies we don't tend to object to what is called tree husbandry. Because it applies to a tree which is subject to a TPO, we would probably say that we have no objection subject to a contrary view of the tree preservation, the tree officer at NNC, which I would imagine we'd be happy with as a response. So subject to planning outcomes, they're set out there, with the interesting thing about 3 week replacement circumstances. And you saw at the end of those, there was a tree works one where we said no objection subject to any contrary review of the tree preservation officer, tree preservation officer, tree officer. The next item on the agenda is to receive recent correspondence from Tom Thirst Club, which followed an approach from Councillor Reichel. Councillor Reichel was, of course, ENC District Councillor until the District Council was abolished. He is no longer a councillor in the sense at unitary council level. He come joined us instead. And he sent an email which has been sort of provided to all of you, saying, here's a letter I sent to Tom Thirst Club, and then subsequently he got a fairly swift response from our MP, which simply said this: in order to ensure ministers are aware of your concerns, to provide you with an official and fully informed response, I have today written to the Right Honourable Robert Jenrick MP, Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, asking them to review your concerns and to let me have their thoughts on the matters raised at the earliest opportunity, and I will of course forward you a copy of any response I receive. What we haven't seen yet is the response from Robert Jenrick. Knowing how Robert Jenrick has responded in the past when we've raised issues with him directly, I'm not holding my breath for us to receive a reply that would send us away quivering with joy. But there we go. So I thought it was worth drawing it to Councillors' attention, and I will ask Councillor Reichel that when the reply comes through from Tom, he should copy it to myself and to the office, and then we'll make sure that it comes back before the committee. And if at that stage we want to talk about it specifically, we can do. But of course the reality is that we've already done a lot of work on the two planning applications that he specifically refers to. We also put in a very detailed response to the planning white paper that he makes reference to, and so on. I'm not sure there's anything specifically for us to do now unless anybody has a different view. No. The final item on the agenda, a wonderful thing about these meetings is that we do tend to finish them relatively speedily, unless we have particularly contentious planning applications half the council here and not half the town as well. So we are on to any other matters. Now the only thing I was going to suggest that we might want to think about is, this is a new council, we have a new planning committee, and I attached to my report, I think something like 7 documents, policies on this, that and the other. Some of them are comparatively recent, as Councillor Chessel will know, but nevertheless it might be that we should put onto an agenda the reconsideration of our various planning documents. Perhaps in particular the main planning guidance document, and the reason for that as much as anything else is that the course is somewhat bulky. There's quite a bit in there that was there as ammunition to use, particularly against the development of the site of St Peter's Road, Cosserstock Road, because of its proximity to the water treatment plant that lies in effect in the next field beyond the one that they wish to develop. And we said pretty firmly that our view was that we wouldn't want to sanction development that brought housing any closer to it. Well, they've already got outline planning permission to do precisely that. And although we may continue to make noises about that aspect of matters when in due course detailed planning is sought, nevertheless we might want to revisit what we said in our planning guidance. So I think maybe for our next meeting, unless the agenda looks incredibly heavy with other stuff, which it probably won't because it's the summer, it's quite heavy, you'd think. But we can put it on that agenda, and if we put it on when it gets really heavy, we just defer it to another meeting. It's not urgent, but I think it's something we could usefully look at. That's it from me. Councillor Chester, is there anything else that you want to?
Nothing to do with planning, but something that's been drawn to my attention in the town, and that is that by up the George there's a zebra crossing, and all the marks have gone, and it's obviously on a route to school with lots of children crossing every day, and I wondered if we could report it.
Yeah.
Please, because the person who's reporting it actually is a parent who, and she was a
That's funny.
professional nanny, and she
Well,
was
you
saying,
should say that,
I
because I
walked
looked
out
up there and I
and
thought, what's different? I couldn't work out what it was that seemed to be missing.
Yeah, it's her own
What
marks.
marks?
And she has to put a hand out and stop the traffic.
So what, the whole of the zebra crossing?
Yes, it's
It's
all
like no.
worn away.
Right. Well, yes, that's a valid point, and it is well raised from this committee as everywhere. It's
Yes, from us and
any other points?
no.
None from me.
Anything from you? Is there anything from our part?
No, I haven't got any.
In which case, I was going to say it's quarter to, it's certainly not quarter to 8. I think it's quarter to 9. I think the clock's an hour out.